Hey y'all, before we get into today's episode, I want to thank HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. HelloFresh is cooking made easy. Get fresh, proportioned ingredients right to your door with step-by-step recipes. HelloFresh has a variety of meal plans to choose from, including meat and veggies, family-friendly, calorie-smart, and more. You can also customize your meal plan sizes and the amount of recipes you receive per week. Choose from delicious, new, chef-curated recipes every week without being locked into a contract. You can cancel your HelloFresh membership at any time or choose to skip a week of delivery, up to 6 weeks in advance. In my HelloFresh box this week, my favorite recipe was the Hey Honey salmon. The meal featured spice-rubbed salmon fillets with a lemony, buttery honey Dijon sauce, and it was paired with tender roasted potato wedges and zesty green beans. Skip the grocery line and meal planning. Head over to HelloFresh.com and use code TrueCrimeCam12 to get 12 free meals, including free shipping. Again, that's code TrueCrimeCam12 to get 12 free meals, including free shipping at HelloFresh.com. In the city of Cheshire, Connecticut, a close-knit community would experience what became known to them as Cheshire's own 9/11. Overnight, it went from a quiet New England town to locals scrambling for security systems, panic buttons, and firearms. In the early hours of July 23, 2007, two men entered the home of the Petit family. Around 9 a.m. that same day, 48-year-old Jennifer Petit walked into a Bank of America. She told the bank teller that her family was being held hostage and proceeded to withdraw $15,000 from her account. The manager immediately called 911. In the transcript, she explained to the operator, quote, "We have a lady who is in our bank right now who says that her husband and children are being held at their house. The people are in a car outside the bank. She is getting $15,000 to bring out to them. Her name is Jennifer Petit." As the bank manager was on the line, Jennifer exited the building. The bank manager continued. She said, quote, "They're tied up. She said they drove her here. I'm trying to look and see where she has gone. Wait, I see her walking now. She is petrified." At 9:28 a.m., a description of Jennifer's car and license plate number was broadcasted to local police. When Jennifer arrived home, the real horrors of this tragedy began. And it all happened while authorities were sitting outside the house. 30 minutes later, at 9:56 a.m., two men were caught fleeing the scene in Jennifer's car. The men were immediately arrested, but behind them, the Petit family home was in flames. 48-year-old Jennifer Petit, 17-year-old Haley, and 11-year-old Michaela were found deceased inside. Miraculously, there was a lone survivor of the family, the father, Dr. William Petit. William had managed to escape the basement and crawl to the neighbor's home for help. He was bleeding profusely, with 3 to 4 inch openings in his skull. The father was immediately taken to the hospital where his head was stitched up. After nearly losing his own life to a brutal beating and fire, he apologized to Jennifer's parents for not saving their daughter and grandchildren. Jennifer's father, Reverend Richard Hawk, had to convince him that it wasn't his fault. He was in no condition to be saving anyone. They were just grateful that he was alive. Looking back, William told Jen's sister, Cynthia, that sometimes he wished he would have gone inside the house because he believed that even if he died in there, he could have done something. Lieutenant J. Markella was interviewed over the phone by Fox News the day of the murders. He claimed that officers arrived just as the suspects were fleeing the burning home, but this timeline he gave didn't make sense to the town of Cheshire. Neither did it make sense to the victim's family and friends. Cynthia wanted to know all the details about the tragedy her sister suffered, so she started an investigation of her own. She wondered why her sister and her captor weren't stopped at the bank. When conducting her own research, she discovered that some police officers had heard the girl screaming. This, of course, was off the record. Jennifer Petit didn't have any blinds on her windows. Cynthia wondered why police officers weren't looking into the house. Cynthia said, quote, "I just want the facts. Nobody has told us what really happened." When the press interviewed Lieutenant Paul Vance, he gave the following statement. First of all, the Cheshire Police Department and their response to this initial call was absolutely outstanding. They did a stellar job. The chief and all those personnel in Cheshire PD deserve a lot of praise and credit. But the Petit family was left wondering why first responders deserved this praise. What did they do specifically that prevented a worse outcome? What was worse than 3 individuals losing their lives? William Petit had to rescue himself from the fire and didn't receive help from anyone until he was out. The first person he came into contact with was his neighbor. If he hadn't leapt up his basement steps, he would have most likely perished alongside with his wife and 2 daughters. Paul Vance refused to release a timeline of the murders. He claimed that it wasn't something that the public needed to be concerned with, and these details were not only withheld from the public, they were withheld from the victims' families. Jennifer's mother, Mary Bell, wrote many letters to the police. She felt that their main goal was to catch the men who were guilty, and put that goal above saving the lives of her family. She asked, quote, "Why didn't they just go to the door, or break a window, or something, and go into that house?" There was conflicting stories with when the police showed up to the scene at all. Authorities claimed that by the time the first officer was on the scene, the house was engulfed in flames. However, as William Petit hopped up the stairs to freedom, he told Cynthia that he was pretty sure he saw men in the woods, hiding behind trees. To Cynthia, this should have alerted police that something heinous was happening in the house, and that they should have gone to investigate. These details were ambiguous until defense lawyers of the 2 suspects were finally given access to a transcript of the police log. Officers had shown up within minutes of Jennifer and her captor arriving to her house. Authorities also had the Petit home phone number early on, but nobody made a call or even knocked on the door. The initial 911 call had been made at 9:21 a.m. The suspects were caught fleeing the home at 9:56 a.m. The police were outside the Petit home for a full 30 minutes, waiting. In that 30 minutes, the suspects were able to bound, rape, murder, and set the home ablaze. William and Jennifer met at a children's hospital in Pittsburgh. Jen was the new nurse, and William was what he called the know-it-all third-year medical student. He was trying to correct Jen on how to take someone's blood pressure. Soon later, it became clear Jennifer knew about pediatrics and how to care for children more than he had ever known. Later on, Jennifer was diagnosed with MS, an autoimmune disease that attacks your central nervous system. It can cause vision loss, numbness, and walking difficulties. When Jennifer's daughter Haley learned of her mother's illness, she feared for her mother's life. But Haley didn't want to just sit with this fear she had. She wanted to do something about it. So she started raising money for her mother's treatment, eventually accruing over $50,000, as well as awards for acting as a spokesperson for MS. 11-year-old Michaela was described as shy by her grandmother, but she would reach out to those she believed were in need. Before the triple homicide, Richard Hawk knew them as compassionate, sociable, and loved by their community. In an interview, he said when he thought about his family, quote, "If I didn't smile about it, I would cry." One of the suspects in the murders, Stephen Hayes, wasn't a new face to law enforcement. He had a long list of burglaries on his record. To commit these crimes, Stephen would frequent parks and walking trails on sunny days. He would wait for families and lovers of nature to descend on their path so he could break into their car and steal anything of value in broad daylight. Looking back on his past legal record, few could predict the horrifying crimes he would later commit. Stephen's record wasn't filled with any records of violence. He would steal people's belongings, but ultimately leave them physically unharmed. Was this act of horrendous violence random? Or did Stephen Hayes have a history of violence off the record that could predict his vicious outcome? Because Stephen had been in and out of jail for theft, he communicated to his young daughter through letters as she grew up. In a letter he wrote before the murders, he said, quote, "Dear Alicia, hello honey, and how are you doing? I haven't heard from you in a while, and neither has Grandma. I want so badly to never hurt you again, and I feel like I am, because I'm still here. Every day I wake up wondering if today will be the day that my name is called. The stress is almost unbearable." Alicia Hayes found out about her father killing 3 members of the Petit family when she was returning from the police academy. Alicia immediately wanted answers. She wanted to know why her father conspired with someone and committed this atrocity. Whose idea was it? Was it the both of them, or did it just happen? Stephen's brother, Matthew Hayes, had strong opinions about his brother and insight on the violent person he had always been. In response to the parole board releasing his brother, he said, quote, "Personally, they're effing stupid because they don't get it. You don't care enough about the people in your society to put these type of people back out on the street. And I want to say that it's really tough for me to say because one of those people is my brother." Brian Hayes described his older brother in an equally harsh light. He claimed that Steve was manipulating and deceptive. He said, quote, "As nasty as it sounds, I hope somebody puts a bullet in his head outside the courtroom." 26-year-old Joshua Komisarjevsky had a more troubling past than his co-conspirator. Joshua's defense attorney, William Garris, described him as a little, skinny, frail kid behind the jail's bars. Josh was an adopted child and was homeschooled for the majority of his life. To William, it appeared as if Joshua's upbringing was privileged and filled with love. So how did a kid like that make his way to William's desk in desperate need of defense? During 2001 and 2002, Joshua committed 19 counts of burglary and 2 counts of larceny. William claimed that Josh was a genius due to his photographic memory, and his attention to detail was so precise, no normal mind could possibly retain it. Joshua was able to recount to authorities every burglary he ever committed. Not only that, but detail every item he stole, what drawer he took it from, and where he disposed of it. William said that Josh could enter the 3rd story of a home, steal some cash, and know the denomination of the bills he took years later. He could recall where each wallet was, and what kind of pants they were taken from, and where exactly those pants were. During these burglaries, Josh would stay in the victim's home for hours, escaping detection. He would use sophisticated tools, like night vision goggles and latex gloves. After he gathered all the valuables he desired, he would occasionally stay in the victim's house and listen to their breathing. William described how Joshua would go room to room, listening to every individual in the house, breathing in their sleep. Josh never explained why he would do this, but William believed this was the most frightening aspect of his prior crimes. William told the judge that Joshua needed to be watched. He said, quote, "This kid is sick. You're never going to see him again, or he's going to be the worst criminal to pass through these doors, because that's the kind of mind he's got." In 2002, Josh was sentenced to 9 years in prison. He was released on parole just 5 years later, in 2007, the same year he would conspire with Stephen Hayes in committing a triple homicide. Joshua's uncle said his nephew was a monster, and that wasn't how members of the family behaved. The Komisarjevsky bloodline has an impressive history, consisting of art, music, and great wealth. Joshua's great-aunt, Vera Komisarjevsky, had been a celebrated actress and theater manager during the late Russian Empire. Her father, Fyodor, was a famous Russian opera singer. Joshua's grandfather was a renowned theatrical director in both Russia and England, and took on roles as an architect and costume designer as well. He directed groundbreaking plays, wrote several books, and had an incredible lifelong career. But now, the Komisarjevsky name would have a different meaning to people in Cheshire. It would remind them of the evils that Joshua committed. As soon as it was confirmed that Joshua Komisarjevsky was the killer, The media swarmed his family's home, trying to get any information they could for their next headline. Eventually, the press got what they wanted. A bodiless hand appeared and passed a piece of paper through a window to an individual from the press. The typed statement from the Komisarjevsky family read, quote, "This is an absolute tragedy. Our deepest sympathy goes out to the Petit family and all those whose lives they touched. We cannot understand what would have made something like this happen. There is nothing else we can say at this time." Prior to the murders, Joshua was undergoing therapy at the Berman Treatment Center. His counselor, Michael Deleuze, said that because he had been meeting with him in this setting, he could paint Josh in a different light. Michael claimed that the media and most people's opinion of Josh would go against what he saw and what he knew about Josh. According to him, Josh just wanted to do better things with his life. He wanted to stay clean, reconnect with his family, and forward his education to become an architect, like his grandfather. Michael saw someone who created beautiful designs and sketches. He called Josh's ability unnatural and filled with pure talent. But now, knowing the cold-blooded acts that Joshua committed, Michael was left in disbelief. He questioned how he could enter the courtroom and tell the jury that Josh was indeed a good kid that he had formed a bond with. Bob Farr, the chairman of the Board of Pardons and Paroles, was interviewed by the press. He claimed that there was no obvious flags that Joshua and Stephen would commit this heinous crime. Before the trial, Bob said that after their release on parole, Joshua and Stephen were doing just fine. They were both employed, passing their drug tests, and living in stable households. Mike Lawler, a chairman of the Connecticut Judiciary Commission, had the opposite perspective of Stephen and Joshua. He claimed that the warning bells were there prior to the murders, and they were ringing very loudly. Prosecutors are required to order a transcript of the sentencing proceeding and pass it on to the parole board. This transcript details everything about a criminal's past and lets the parole board in on everything they need to know before a decision is made. However, this transcript that called Joshua Komisarjevsky a cold-blooded predator with a mental abnormality was never read by the Department of Corrections. Due to this, the perspective of Joshua's criminal history was incredibly skewed. The Department of Corrections saw a first-time ever incarcerated inmate. They saw a young, white, homeschooled, bright, remorseful person. And they never saw that he was a person with high mental health needs. Joshua's statement to the court read, quote, "I am truly sorry. I wish that some of the victims had shown up today, because I really wanted to express to them that I really am sorry for the things that I did. And when I said that I wish there was more that I could do, I truly wish that there was anything that I could do more for them." Mike claimed that Joshua manipulated the court to reduce his sentence. The typical sentence for burglary is a maximum of 10 years in prison for each offense. If Joshua was sentenced by the court by its full extent, it would have accumulated into 2 lifetimes. Joshua had been having relationships with 2 sisters, the daughters of Reverend Norman Messel. He claimed that Joshua sought out his daughters due to the fact that they looked very young. Joshua even wanted to propose to his daughter Caroline. In a phone conversation with Josh, Norman told him he had 2 major concerns. 1, he thought he was a career criminal, and 2, he believed he was a pedophile. Joshua's tone of voice never changed, and his only response was, quote, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Joshua wrote a letter to Caroline from jail that's dated April 15th, 2006. It reads, quote, "Dear Caroline, good evening, sweetheart. I have one of your pictures taped to the wall, facing my bed. When I wake up every morning, the sun is just starting to rise, and its rays shimmer through the branches of an old oak tree outside my window. Its light dances across your picture, radiating your beautiful eyes and pretty smile. It's the best part of my day, a calming mix of hope, beauty, and tranquility. As much as I wish I was there with you now, smile, beautiful, and know you're on my mind. Take care, Caroline. Smile. Someone's thinking of you. Strength and honor, sincerely, Joshua. P.S. Miss you." Caroline described Joshua as a hopeless romantic. It was the side of him she loved most. She described that when the two were together, they'd drive through wealthy neighborhoods, gazing at their dream homes. Joshua told Caroline he wanted to live in a large house with a nice family. He didn't want anything that was broken. In terms of the couple's love life, Caroline claimed that they were very sexually active and that Joshua even liked to tie her up. He would always ask Caroline if the restraints were too tight and if she was okay. Joshua was concerned for her well-being during their experiments. Caroline ended the interview on the verge of tears, saying that Joshua was her soulmate. Months before the murders, Stephen and Joshua were living in a halfway house, undergoing therapy. Stephen's therapy notes during his group evaluations were extremely unsettling. His notes read, quote, "For this addict, drugs are not my main problem. I am my main problem. My self-destructive attitude and behavior. What I like about getting high is to escape my feelings. I've self-medicated so much I don't know how to feel anymore. Unresolved anger controls me. It haunts me day and night, sometimes to the point of obsession. Even scary fantasy." In May of 2007, 2 months before the crime, Stephen and Joshua were released from that halfway house. From May to July, Stephen lived with his mother in a 1-bedroom apartment. His mother took the bedroom, and Stephen took the couch. His brother Brian had to sleep on the floor. Brian disliked his brother so much, he would avoid the apartment until it was time for him to sleep. One night, the two got into a physical altercation that left Brian with 3 broken ribs and a black eye. Looking back, Brian wished he had charged Stephen for the assault. It would have violated his probation, and the Petit family would be unscathed. Eventually, Stephen's mother was growing tired of taking care of her adult son and the trouble he brought with him. She kicked him out of the house, with nowhere for Stephen to go, days before the crime. Stephen was still a recovering addict, and once he saw his life on the downslope once again, he turned to the comfort of drugs. Dr. Eric Goldsmith did a psychiatric examination of Stephen after his arrest. He reported that after Stephen was kicked out of his mother's house, he locked himself in a hotel room with crack cocaine and heroin. This drug binge came about in the hopes that he would end up killing himself, but this attempt failed, and Stephen left the hotel room feeling even more down and desperate than ever. Stephen managed to make his way to an AA meeting in Hartford, and there he was, Joshua Komisarjevsky, his partner in crime. Stephen and Joshua started chatting, and Joshua brought up some ways to make some real money. The last time Caroline talked to Joshua was Sunday night, the night before the murders. She tried to reach him the next day, but was left unanswered. Joshua's mother contacted Caroline, wondering where her son was. All she knew was that Joshua left their house dressed in dark clothing, which he only did when he was about to rob houses. At approximately 6 o'clock on July 22, 2007, Joshua and Stephen met a contractor at a Stop and Shop in Cheshire. Joshua had supposedly done work for the contractor and went there to receive his payment. While they were waiting for the contractor, Joshua saw Jennifer and Michaela walk into the store. 15 minutes later, they re-emerged. Joshua thought they were driving a nice vehicle. According to him, for whatever reason, he decided to follow them. When he drove by the house, Joshua thought it would be nice to be there someday and not have to worry or stress about financial problems. After his daydreams came to an end, he returned home to spend the evening with his 5-year-old daughter. At 10 p.m., Joshua left his home again and met with Stephen at the same Stop and Shop. They started driving around in Joshua's car and brainstorming ways to make money quick, legally or illegally. Joshua claimed he had many debts and obligations. They thought about creeping up behind people, getting cash out of ATMs, catching people leaving a bar late at night. Then suddenly, Joshua remembered the nice car that Jennifer drove, and the nice house that they lived in. They then made their way to the Petit family home, parking on the street a little ways away. Joshua claimed he cut eye holes in a t-shirt and tied it around his face. Stephen pulled a work hat down over his face and cut holes in it as well. On him, he carried a pellet gun. This pellet gun was purchased at a Walmart the day before. Joshua had accompanied him. Around 3 a.m., they peered through the windows and saw William Petit asleep on the sunroom's couch. They then tried all the doors on the house until they came to the basement door, the only door left unlocked. Stephen told Josh he wouldn't be able to sneak up on the man on the couch, so Josh was given the task of taking down the father. At the bottom of the steps, a baseball bat was leaning on the rail. Joshua armed himself with the bat and struck William several times, splitting the front of his head open. According to Joshua, he let out the most unearthly scream, but Joshua continued to hit him until he backed into the corner of the couch, terrified. At this point, William was bleeding profusely. Joshua then unlocked the sunroom door for Stephen, and the two bound his wrists and ankles with rope. William asked who they were and why they were doing this. Joshua stated, "They just wanted money, and when they got what they came for, they'd be gone." After learning that 3 more Petit family members were in the home, Stephen and Joshua crept up the stairs into the master bedroom. Michaela and Jennifer had fallen asleep watching TV. Their mouths were covered as they were shaken awake and asked to turn onto their stomachs. The same was done to Haley. She asked what was going on and begged them not to hurt her. Joshua said that he wasn't there to hurt her, they were just looking for money and they'd be on their way. Joshua stayed in the master bedroom while Stephen combed the house for cash. Jennifer told them where her jewelry and valuables were, but they weren't interested. Selling the items they stole would be another risky step in the process. They wanted money, fast. Eventually, Stephen came across a register with $40,000. The two of them decided that they would take Jennifer to the bank and withdraw just $15,000 from the account. Drawing the full amount might raise a red flag. They reassured her that there wouldn't be any problems, as long as she complied. While Stephen was still rummaging through the house for cash, at some point Joshua locked eyes with 11-year-old Michaela. He claimed she was calm and had a look on her face like she understood that they wouldn't hurt her. The sun was beginning to rise, and the men realized they had a problem. Joshua's car was still parked nearby. After arguing about who was going to move it, the men decided to restrain the family to their beds. Michaela was moved back to her own room, where her wrists and ankles were tied to her bed frame. Jennifer and Haley were also restrained to their own beds. William was left bound, but not tied to anything in the basement. Stephen then drove Jennifer's SUV, while Josh followed behind in his white Chevy van. Joshua ended up leaving his car parked in a visitor spot at an apartment complex nearby. The two went back to the Petit family home in Jennifer's vehicle, and upon arrival, Stephen took Joshua into the office where they could talk in private. Stephen told Joshua that they needed gasoline. A drop of sweat or a hair falling from their head could leave DNA at the scene, tracing them back to the home invasion. Stephen mentioned bringing the whole family with them in the vehicle and abandoning the car far from the burning home. Another 15 minutes passed by while Joshua was talking to Michaela in her room. Stephen grabbed him again and continued to talk about DNA evidence and the fact that Josh had used Stephen's real name in front of the victims. Josh told detectives, quote, "All of a sudden, we gotta kill them." The men covered the faces of Jennifer, Michaela, and Haley with pillowcases so they could take off their makeshift masks. Around 8 a.m., Stephen proceeded to empty bottles of windshield wiper fluid into the sink and head to the gas station alone. Surveillance video discovered later showed Stephen buying the $10 worth of gas, the gas used to burn down the Petit home. At 9 o'clock, Jennifer drove Stephen to the bank in her vehicle and made the withdrawal. Joshua went to Michaela's room and sat down with her to, quote, just pass the time. He told police he thought 11-year-old Michaela was between 14 to 16 years old. Joshua then used a pair of scissors to cut off 11-year-old Michaela's clothing. He said, quote, One thing led to another, and I ended up performing oral sex on her. When the detective asked if it was against her will, his response was, quote, "Her hands were tied, but her feet weren't." Joshua then ejaculated onto her and took pictures with his cell phone. After Stephen and Jennifer returned from the bank, Stephen began pacing the house. According to Joshua, he was psyching himself up for the murders. Eventually, Stephen went to the living room and was alone with Jennifer for a total of 15 minutes. During that time, he raped and strangled 48-year-old Jennifer to death. The only thing William Petit heard from his family during the invasion was his wife pleading nicely with Stephen and Joshua. She asked if she could get her purse, and if she couldn't, then they would know something was up at the bank. After hearing this, William hopped up the back basement steps and made his way to freedom. At this point in the timeline, the house is surrounded with a SWAT team and armed officers. William was using all of his strength to hobble over to the neighbor's house, still bound, screaming for help. Joshua and Stephen began to panic because they heard William escape. Stephen doused the living room, kitchen, and upstairs with gasoline. Michaela and Haley were still alive, tied to their beds, with their heads covered as gas is poured all around them. As Joshua was frantically roaming around the house, he looks through the sunroom window. There, clear as day to him, was someone watching him from the bushes. William recounted later that he too saw people in the surrounding bushes and trees when he escaped from the basement. Joshua ran out to the car as Stephen is trying to light a match to destroy the evidence. Joshua claimed he could still see the person, watching them from the grass. As the two of them reversed out of the driveway in Jennifer's car, police sirens blared. Joshua drove directly into an unmarked police car that was blocking the driveway. He then drove forward through the lawn and into another police barricade of 2 Cheshire police cars. Joshua and Stephen were immediately arrested after this, and Josh informed the officers that 2 girls were still alive in the burning home. 11-year-old Michaela and 17-year-old Haley died as a result of the fire. Haley's remains were found face down in the upstairs hallway. The front of her clothing was more severely burned than the back. This indicated that she'd been directly exposed to the fire before dying of smoke inhalation. The medical examiner claimed that Michaela had likely suffered a painful death as well. On top of the 6 counts of capital felony murder they received, a state prosecutor sought the death penalty for Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky. At the New Haven courthouse, both Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky entered a guilty plea to accept life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, this plea was rejected by the prosecution. The state wanted Stephen and Josh to face the ultimate punishment, death. In the Petit and Hawk family, there was conflicting opinions on the death penalty. Jennifer's father, Richard, was a United Methodist minister, and his church is opposed to capital punishment. Jennifer's parents stood by their church, continuing to oppose the death penalty, but they still wanted justice for their family and the inhumanity they suffered. William Petit was on the opposite side of the scale. After suffering alongside his family and nearly experiencing the same fate, he was pro-death penalty. William said, quote, "You know, it just makes me want to cry." Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela were kind, sweet, and they looked out for other people. They spent their time helping people. For them to suffer horrific deaths seems incredibly unjust. They were the 3 people that I knew and loved the best in the world. The opposition of the evil that attacked us and goodness they represented is just worlds apart. The trial for Stephen Hayes began on September 13th, 2010. His defense argued that Joshua Komisarjevsky was the mastermind behind the brutal killings and escalated the violence at every point. After the jury deliberated for 5 hours, they came back with a guilty verdict. Stephen Hayes was charged with 16 total counts, including felony murder, kidnapping, and assault. Due to these charges, he faced the possibility of the death penalty. For the first time in state history, jurors were offered post-traumatic stress assistance due to the graphic images and testimonies they heard. On December 2, 2010, Judge John Blue sentenced Stephen Hayes to death. Judge Blue stated, quote, "This is a terrible sentence, but is, in truth, a sentence you wrote for yourself in flames. May God have mercy on your soul." Stephen was given an execution date of May 27, 2011. This date was a formality because in most cases the defendants will repeal and the execution is delayed for decades. On September 19, 2011, Joshua Komisarjevsky's trial began. Like Stephen Hayes' lawyers, they pushed the blame onto the other suspect in the case. They argued that Josh was a confused and easily led man, and that he never intended to kill anyone. Despite his confession claiming that Stephen poured the gasoline, there was evidence of gasoline on his clothes as well. Investigators also found bleach on Michaela's clothes, which implied that Joshua was trying to get rid of his DNA. On October 13, 2011, Joshua was found guilty of all 16 charges that Stephen faced as well, in addition to 1 count of arson in the first degree. On January 27, 2012, Joshua was sentenced to death by lethal injection. His execution date was set for July 20, 2012. Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky never faced their executions. In August of 2015, the Connecticut Supreme Court declared all capital punishment inconsistent with the state constitution. This commuted their death sentences into life imprisonment. William Petit condemned the Supreme Court's decision and believed they had overstepped their powers. He urged the court to consider the emotional impact on victims and their loved ones that death penalty cases generate. Years after the murder, Dr. William Petit started to rebuild his family. He started the Petit Family Foundation in honor of Jennifer, Michaela, and Haley. Those funds are given to foster the education of young people, especially women in the sciences, to improve the lives of those affected by chronic illnesses, and to support efforts to protect and help those affected by violence. Through this foundation, he met Christine, a volunteer. The couple married in 2012 and currently have a 7-year-old son, William III. In 2016, Dr. Petit was elected to the Connecticut House of Representatives. He's currently serving his 2nd term. That same year, Stephen Hayes was transferred to Green State Prison in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. As of the end of 2019, Stephen has started receiving hormone therapy and detailed his experience in an interview. Stephen didn't state his preferred pronouns, but said he was transgender and had been medically diagnosed with gender dysphoria. As of today, Stephen resides at Benner Township State Correctional Institution in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. Joshua Komisarjevsky was transferred to a Pennsylvania prison in 2016. There, he attempted to take his own life. On April 12, 2021, the Connecticut Supreme Court rejected Joshua's appeal. This appeal claimed that Joshua was denied a fair trial due to the publicity he received in New Haven. Joshua currently resides in a prison in Phoenix, Pennsylvania, where he will live the remainder of his life. As always, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you can tell that I got a whole new recording setup, so I hope that sounds a lot better for you all. If you want to keep supporting me, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel for more. You can also follow me on my social medias at TrueCrimeCam on TikTok and Instagram. I'm also really excited to announce that I'll be posting new content at least twice a month on YouTube now, so you all will be hearing my voice a lot more often. Again, thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for next episode.